There we go.
Hello everyone and welcome to our class this evening. We are covering the history of Friday the 13th, which, did you silence that?
Yes, I did.
Fantastic. Which I'm covering because every year at this time, I see a massive amount of misinformation online. In particular in witchy and occult communities. I see the same things shared on Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook every year, and they're false. So as both a witch and a historian, for whom history is just my passion, it's a major part of my life, I wanted to address because it was just driving me up the wall. So first of all, happy Friday the 13th, everybody. I hope that you are having a good one. I hope that you are not stressed out about it. And now let me just get into my notes, and hopefully I won't bore all of you to tears with all of my history.
Right, let me
research.
Let me cut in, and this specifically happened because this morning, over the space of about 10 minutes, you read about
so much.
six
It was
pieces
so
of
much
major misinformation and said, okay, you know what, screw it. We're gonna go ahead and
Which
talk
is why
about...
the class did not have like any forewarning. I was just like, oh, by the way, we're just doing this evening. So, all right, let's get into it. Friday the 13th occurs when the 13th day of the month in the Gregorian calendar falls on a Friday, which happens at least once every year, but which can occur up to 3 times in the same year. Friday the 13th occurs in any month that begins with a Sunday. So this month, for example. Although many people treat Friday the 13th as a joke more than anything, there are some for whom it is a genuine part of their folk traditions, or for whom the day is genuinely distressing and associated with not only bad luck, but such ill fortune that they don't leave their homes. Fridays have been associated with ill fortune in some cultures, in some traditions, for a very long time. Even Chaucer alluded to Friday as a day on which bad things happened in his Canterbury Tales, which were written in the late 14th century. The quote is, "And on a Friday fell all of this mischance." You could also translate that from the Old English to misfortune.
Right.
But specific references to Friday as a day connected with ill luck generally start in Western literature around the 17th century. You start seeing quotes like, "Now Friday came, you old wives say, of all the weeks, the unluckiest day," which is a quote from 1656. Over the course of this particular class and live cast, because we are currently live casting on Facebook and I am recording to post on YouTube later this evening, I want to cover the history of how both Fridays, and more specifically Fridays that fall on the 13th, became considered a day of ill luck. But before getting into the verifiable history, I'm going to start with some unverifiable history, which is just because it's what upset me enough this morning to want to host this class in the first place.
More accurately, unverifiable history would be something where we have a pretty good theory, but we can't prove it. This is
just misinformation. It's mythic history. Yeah, it's a mythic history, which tells you more about the culture that creates the mythic history
than about actual historical events. And it should be noted that mythic history is in some ways valuable.
Yes.
It just shouldn't be taken as fact.
It's interesting because almost all cultures have had a mythic history, and you can look at what they said about what they considered ancient preceding cultures,
right,
and learn a lot about them. So, someday someone's going to look at our mythic history and be like, wow, this teaches us so much culturally about what these people were going through and why they created this mythic history. But let's get into it. So first, I want to debunk the witch cult theory, because every year I see this one particular theory go around on Tumblr, on Facebook, on Instagram, with some version of the following. Friday the 13th was a holy day for Freya, the goddess of sex in Viking culture. Friday was named after her for this reason. There were priestesses and witches for whom Friday the 13th was a sacred holiday, and when Christians sought to eradicate the worship of Freya, target that ancient religion, and kill all the priestesses and all the witches, they labeled that day unlucky in order to do so. You may have seen this post go around as the patriarchy stole Friday the 13th. That's the tagline. And I just want to say really quick, I am a feminist. I am a witch. This is a post that is very definitely geared towards getting me invested. Just like that post that goes around every year that claims that Easter is from Ishtar. No, it isn't.
But
people don't know. They don't know the history. They share that post. It goes around, and pretty soon you have a widespread, pervasive widespread
based on misinformation.
Mythic history based on misinformation.
And then
that was a tongue twister that shouldn't have been a tongue twister.
And then you get someone coming along and saying, it's funny, every sentence of that paragraph was wrong.
You just had to quote Luke Skywalker?
I was misquoting Luke Skywalker. Totally
weird.
different.
Okay. It is true that Fridays are named for a Germanic goddess. It just wasn't Freya. Babylonian astrologers divided the 28 lunar cycles, the 28-day lunar cycle, into a time span of 4 periods with 7 days each. They even had leap years in order to keep their calculations of the moon cycle in line with their calendar. Eventually, when the Romans developed their calendar, they borrowed from Babylonian calendar and expanded upon it. When they did so, they named each of the days after one of their gods. Friday was named Venus, after the Roman goddess for love and fertility. The Greeks, on the other hand, called Friday the day of Aphrodite. The fact that the Romans kind of just blend and syncretize and merge and steal and rename will be relevant again in this class.
Right.
And in other classes that we teach.
If you have made a study of Rome, you know that this is a pattern. They would find something in a culture that they were conquering, blending with whatever, and go, yes, we like that. You did a good job with that. It's ours now.
Yes. Okay. Friday maintained the name of Venus after the fall of Rome until the 5th century CE. At this time, Old English speakers started calling it Frigg's Day. Frigg was the Germanic goddess of love and fertility, amongst other things. Friday is named after Frigg, not Freya. Actually, Friday was named for Frigga, the Anglo-Saxon counterpart of Frigg. The English days of the week come from Old English, which pre-existed any linguistic exchange with Old Norse. Both languages are Proto-Germanic in origin, though. Anyway, in Norse mythology, Frigg and Freya are separate beings. They're not actually even the same species, as Frigg is Aesir and Freya is Vanir. There is some historical evidence that they were originally, in very early mythology, the same figure. Their names have the same origin word, and they share similar domains of influence, but in terms of, like, Scandinavian mythology, no, they're separate. Right, moving on. Where did I go? However, Freya isn't worshipped outside of Scandinavian traditions, whereas Frigg is worshipped throughout all Germanic traditions. As a reminder, the Norse traditions are Germanic, but not all Germanic traditions are Norse. Friday became Frigg's Day because, as we said, when Proto-Germanic people, the same ones who would later become the Angles, the Saxons, the Frisians, and the Jutes, and then eventually become the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse, adopted the Roman week calendar, at which time all parties were kind of like, well, Venus is kind of like Frigg. Now, whether this was because the Romans were trying to be their version of friendly, or because there was any kind of manipulation or pressure, or because they were sort of doing the, no, we all actually worship the same thing, just by different names. We don't know. It's not written down. There's not enough evidence. But it's definitely in the pattern of Roman spread through areas to sort of syncretize and blur and rename and shift around. See also our video series on the history of solstice and Yule. Moving right along. There are just no scholarly or historical sources that back up the claim about some secret feminist witch cult worshipping Freya on Friday the 13th. None. I looked and looked and looked and looked when those articles first started going around. And then today, for about 6 hours, I went and tried to look again. Although the claim is widespread right now in online spiritual communities, with some people going as far as stating that a sacred worldwide coven of witches all meet on the 13th in groups of 13 in honor of the day, there is just no evidence. The claims are often contradictory, and they just don't make a lot of sense. Oh, and another thing. I've seen a lot of people disputing this false history with another false history, which doesn't help. If you go, this is a massive chunk of misinformation, let me correct it, and you're correcting it with another chunk of misinformation, that's not helpful. And unfortunately, instead of it being like a group of occult people on social media just banding about misinformation, this misinformation was on a lot of different websites that are supposed to be trusted historical sources. So don't even get me started on the fact, oh, and they all cited each other. I was like, what are your sources for this? Let me look into it. I actually did eventually find what book it was that they were all actually citing. But the thing was that the articles themselves all had as sources the other articles. So that's frustrating. Anyway, the claim is that 13 is an unlucky number in Norse culture. So it never would have been a sacred day in Norse culture, due to events that occurred at a dinner held by the gods, at which 12 gods sat down to eat, and a 13th uninvited god, Loki, came and engaged in flighting with the other gods. Flighting being a contest consisting of the exchange of insults between two parties, often conducted in verse.
First of all, Loki wins those. Second of all, this is a reference to the Loki Senna, which is fantastic. And if you haven't read it, it's amazing. Third of all, sorry, but that doesn't actually have anything...
Well, no, so what they say is that at this dinner, Loki okay, so in the actual version,
right,
Loki gets into a fight with all of the gods, a verbal fight. And then Thor shows up and several times threatens to knock Loki's head off with his hammer.
Right.
And Loki's like, you're actually the only person here that I am afraid of. So I'm gonna leave. He leaves and is chased by the other gods. He turns into a salmon. The other gods manage to find him anyway, and they bind him in a really disturbing and distressing way, if you ever look into the Loki Senna. But the mythological version of this story,
or the...
No, okay, so the false version being bandied about in these articles of the mythological version of this story,
there we go,
says that at this dinner, Loki killed Balder. And so this dinner ended up leading to the death of Balder and the world falling into darkness. Loki actually killed Balder in a different epic. Now, it's mentioned in the Loki
in fact, in the Loki Senna, it is mentioned that Loki has already killed Balder. So, no.
Yes, and to be clear, Loki arranged for Balder to die with a mistletoe arrow fired by someone else, but it was his machinations that led to it. The Lokasenna does not directly state that Loki's binding is a consequence of the killing of Balder. This is explicitly only stated in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. And the number 13 isn't particularly associated with bad luck in Norse culture. So we really shouldn't argue with one chunk of misinformation using another chunk of misinformation. Is everything all right?
Yeah.
So let's get into the actual verifiable history, because that's all the unverifiable, or at least
give me a second. Keep talking.
Okay.
I'll provide that.
All right. People asking about the Lokasenna?
Yeah. The question was what the name of it is, so I'm copying it over.
Okay. So what is the verifiable history behind Friday the 13th? From what history actually supports, Fridays are considered ill days because of a blending of Hebrew sacred days, Roman, early Christian, and Germanic history, mythology, and folklore that all spread and merged as first the early Christians borrowed from Hebrew culture heavily.
Well, I mean, the early Christians were
Predominantly
Hebrew.
Um,
So that makes sense.
Then as Rome Christianized, and then as Roman Christianity spread through Germanic regions and blended into Germanic culture. So that's where a lot of the Fridays are significant, because they aren't necessarily always ill, but they are significant. They are portentous. To start with, Fridays were execution days in ancient Rome, and continued to be the date when arrests and executions were ordered in Roman-conquered Germanic areas. They eventually became the hanging days in Great Britain, and there were even 13 steps leading up to the noose, and a hangman's noose has 13 knots. So, you get some associations there. The following biblical events all happened on Fridays. Eve gave the forbidden fruit to Adam, and he ate from it. God expelled Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve died. Cain murdered Abel. Noah's flood began. God destroyed the Tower of Babel. The Temple of Solomon was destroyed by fire, and Jesus was crucified. Fridays are pretty significant in the Christian context.
Yeah, someone's saying they didn't know that. The significance of Friday is actually, I'm not going to say it's biblical in origin, but there's an enormous biblical significance to the day.
In particular, in like Roman Catholicism,
Yeah.
Fridays are a big deal. Not always a bad luck thing, which we'll get further into, but they're a big deal. Another Christian origin for the superstitions regarding Friday the 13th is the trials of the Knights Templar, which started with their arrest on Friday the 13th of October 1307 CE. The targeting of the Knights Templar was perpetrated, that's the word I'm trying to say, not perpetuated, perpetrated, by Philip IV of France and his counselors with aims to acquire the vast wealth of the Templars. It should be noted, however, that many of the claims regarding the association between the Knights Templar and Friday the 13th are also false. Sorry, I'm just taking away everybody's mythic history today.
Including Dan Brown's.
Yep, especially Dan Brown's. You know he got sued? Anyway,
Yes.
Sorry. Not the point. I've seen a lot of people claiming that the Templars were targeted for all kinds of ahistorical reasons. That they were hiding the bloodline of Christ, that they had found the Holy Grail, that they possessed secret heretical knowledge that had to be silenced, or that they were actually practicing super powerful and super secret magic. The truth is that all of this was almost certainly due to greed, and the accusation of heresy was a weapon used by greedy men to accomplish their ends. The accusation of heresy allowed for the seizure of the wealth of the Templars by the throne without the Pope opposing the destruction of a religious order, and it allowed the Pope to look the other way as his political opponents were destroyed.
Right, the Templars were an incredibly rich and therefore incredibly powerful organization within the Catholic Church, and they were an incredibly powerful organization that did not answer to royal authority, that happened to have a great deal of money. Everyone got something they wanted out of this deal, except for the Templars.
A lot of the accusations of heresy or of witchcraft throughout many, many centuries were really about power and money. Who owned what? Anyway, moving on. The Templars also did not actually become the Freemasons, but that is a rant for a different day, and it's not today, because I'm already pissing everybody off. Let's save that one for another day with a new glass of whiskey. All right.
Would you like more whiskey?
I'm good for now.
Okay.
But after, maybe. So, there was an even earlier massacre that occurred on Friday the 13th, which may have influenced its negative associations, particularly in Christian Europe. The St. Brice's Day massacre was the killing of Danes in the Kingdom of England on Friday the 13th of November of 1002 CE, which was ordered by King Aethelrod the Unready. Did I say it right?
Close enough.
Awesome.
I'm not an expert in the pronunciation either.
In response to frequent Danish raids, King Aethelrod ordered the execution of all Danes living in England. Although archaeological evidence is somewhat lacking, the skeletons of 34 to 38 men aged 16 to 25 were found during an excavation of St. John's College in Oxford in 2008 CE, which some historians believe may be the remains of some of the victims of the massacre. Historians believe that there was actually a fairly significant genocide, although evidence is lacking on any specific estimates. But if those arrests and genocides happened on Friday the 13th, maybe that means the day really is bad luck. But remember, arrests and executions were always ordered on Fridays in Rome, and then again in later Christianized Germanic areas. My computer's dying, so Ian is going to fetch a charger, so if you get missed in the comments for just a short moment, it's while he's fetching a charger so that my computer doesn't die. So Fridays evolving into ill days. We're going to start with Fridays and then move into the 13th. Superstitions surrounding this ill-fated day of the week were first recorded in the late 14th century CE, which we mentioned earlier already in the class when Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales that on a Friday fell all this mischance or misfortune. By the mid-17th century, references to Fridays being bad luck became more common in Western literature. One reference to the day, written in 1656 CE, reads, "Now Friday came, you old wives say, with all the week's unluckiest days." This actually comes from a drolling verse by Richard Flecknoe. That's a great name, Flecknoe. Anyway.
Yes.
From the early 19th century onward, Fridays are recorded throughout Western literature not as just ill-fortuned, but as a bad time to do just about anything. I'm going to just read to you a series of quotes, which I found from a variety of articles. When this goes up on our website, I have all of the sources of various online articles that I read, various historical books that I read, but I'm just going to rattle through them and tell you what their dates were, because I do want to keep this class relatively short and not bore everyone to tears.
Citations get boring.
Citations get boring. I knew another poor woman who lost half her time in waiting for lucky days and made it a rule never to write a letter on business on a Friday, so her business was never done, and her fortune suffered accordingly. That quote comes from Charlotte Smith in 1863. There are still a few respectable tradesmen and merchants who will not transact business, or be bled, or take physic on a Friday because it is an unlucky day. The Yearbook of Daily Recreation and Information from 1832. It was apparently an inauspicious day to do needleworking. I knew an old lady who, if she had nearly completed a piece of needlework on a Thursday, would put it aside unfinished, and set a few stitches in her next undertaking, that she might not be obliged either to begin the new task on Friday, or to remain idle for a day. This one comes from Shropshire Folklore in 1883. It was also considered a bad day for harvesting. My father once decided to start harvest on a Friday, and men went out on the Thursday evening and unpaid, cut along one side of the first field with their scythes, in order to dodge the malign fates which a Friday start would begin. That one comes from 1933. So in 1933, you have these workmen working for free to get everything cut down, so they don't start on a Friday. Laying the keel or launching of a ship. Fishermen would have great misgivings about laying the keel of a new boat on Friday, as well as launching one on that day. That one comes from a book of folklore on the sea. Beginning a journey. I knew another poor woman who made it a rule never to set out on a journey on a Friday. That one comes from 1804. A child born on a Friday is doomed to misfortune. That one comes from 1846. Getting married. As to Friday, a couple married on that day was doomed to a cat and dog life. 1879. Recovering from illness. If you've been ill, don't get up for the first time on a Friday. A superstition from the 1920s. Hearing news. If you hear anything new on a Friday, it gives you another wrinkle on your face and adds a year to your age. 1883 CE. Moving. Don't move on a Friday or you won't stay there for very long. That's an actual 1980s superstition. So that's relatively recent. Starting a new job. Servants who go into their situations on Friday never go to stay. That one's from the 1920s. Ships that set sail on Friday will always have bad luck. Sailors are many of them superstitious. A voyage begun on a Friday is sure to be an unfortunate one. That one comes from 1823. In fact, in the 19th century, Admiral William Henry Smith described Friday in his nautical lexicon, the Sailor's Word Book, as the dies infantis, the dies infaustus,
there you go.
blah, 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 on which old seamen were desirous of not getting underway, as it is ill-omened. The dies infaustus means the unlucky day. There's even a well-known urban legend of the HMS Friday related to all of these nautical superstitions. The urban legend claims that in an attempt to debunk the many sailors' superstitions centered around Fridays, the British government commissioned a special ship, the HMS Friday, with a crew selected on a Friday, a keel set on a Friday, and supposedly they even hired a captain named Friday. The legend claimed that the ship set sail on a Friday and was never seen or heard from again. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any historical evidence of this,
but it's a
great story.
Right, so was this the British government attempting to just take all of the bad luck and stick it in one place?
boat, right? We're just going to put it in one boat and send it away, and that'll just take care of it.
It's the scapegoat.
It's the scapegoat. Okay. Whew. Some other things not to do on Fridays from American superstition include, but are not limited to, clothing made on a Friday will never fit well. Most accidents happen on a Friday. I looked into this one, not actually true.
Well, okay, for auto accidents. I doubt they've done the research for all kinds of accidents.
Yeah, it was auto accidents that I looked into. Visiting your doctor on Friday will always have a bad result, like they're going to give you bad news. You're never supposed to change your bed sheets on a Friday, as it will result in nightmares and bad dreams. I change my bed sheets every day, so that would be a problem for me. Right. Don't cut your nails on Friday or sorrow will come your way. In some cases, Good Fridays, the Friday before Easter's, were regarded as an exception to the ill luck usually associated with Friday beginnings. Quoting again, notwithstanding the prejudice against sailing on a Friday, most of the pleasure boats make their first voyage for the season on Good Friday, a quote from 1857. It was accounted unlucky for a child to be born on a Friday, unless it happened to be Good Friday, when the event was counterbalanced by the sanctity of the day, a quote from 1870. It is possible, also, that a lot of our associations of bad luck, being a Friday thing, come from the popular publication of Thomas W. Lawson's popular novel Friday the 13th in 1907 CE, which was also turned into a rather popular film. It likely contributed to the popularity of these superstitions in modern time. In the novel, an unscrupulous broker takes advantage of the superstition to create a Wall Street panic on Friday the 13th. But keep in mind how many of these we just read off were from the 1800s. So
Right.
the superstition was well established for him to write a book, but it may have led to all of those that we read that were in the 1920s.
Right.
So, the dreaded number 13. So, why the 13th? Other than those historical examples that we gave of when certain groups were targeted on Friday the 13th, why is 13 considered a frightening or ill-omened number? And the answer is it isn't in every culture, which we'll get into. But let's talk about triskaidekaphobia. Did I say that right?
Yeah, close enough.
Please say it.
Triskaidekaphobia, yeah, that looks about right.
Triskaidekaphobia?
Yeah. It's Greek, which is not my specialty, but...
That's a guess. I probably should have looked up the pronunciation before I started filming, but too
But that
late
looks
now.
about right.
Is the phobia of the number 13. The avoidance of the number has even seeped through American consumer culture. The fear of the number 13 is a somewhat worldwide phenomenon, although
Well,
it doesn't occur in every culture.
Right, it's a worldwide phenomenon like Hollywood's a worldwide phenomenon.
Right. In some cultures, there are different unlucky numbers, and in some, 13 is actually a positive number. I will list some examples soon, but continuing on. The number 12 pops up in mythology, history, and folklore quite often. There are 12 days of Christmas, 12 months and zodiac signs, 12 labors of Hercules, 12 gods of Olympus, and 12 tribes of Israel, to name a few. And I've seen a lot of people argue that why 13 was considered unlucky was because we have 10 fingers and 2 feet, so we count by 12s. But let me just tell you that the average ancient culture did not
They
count
counted
by 12s.
12 or 16
Or 10.
60 or 10. Babylonians were weird.
Yeah, the Babylonians were weird. But no, that doesn't really scan. Are you taking that with you? In Western culture, 13 often has a negative mythological, historical, and folkloric connotation, but that isn't true for every culture. I just really want to stress that. The ancient Code of Hammurabi, for example, reportedly omitted a 13th law from its list of legal rules. Some historians think that this was a mistake or a clerical error, but some believe this may be the earliest record of the number 13 having negative associations. Ancient Egyptians believed the number 13 was related to the afterlife, the 12 steps on the ladder to eternal life and knowledge, and to take the 13th step meant going through death and into everlasting life. Although we may now think of this as a negative association, the Egyptians may not have. The association between the number 13 and its happenings, whether ill or positive, also dates back to the mythological tale of Isis and Osiris, when Osiris was killed. He was cut into 14 pieces by Set, who scattered them across Egypt. Isis reconstructed and revived Osiris, but in her search for all of his body parts, only 13. Sorry. She was only able to recover 13 pieces, the missing one being his lost phallus. Isis constructed a replacement out of gold. Early Christians believed the number 13 was ill-fated due to the Last Supper. Judas was the 13th man to sit down at the table and partake of the meal with Jesus. This is interesting because you have Jesus' crucifixion being on a Friday, and then you have the Last Supper associated with the negativity of the 13th. Christianized Romans saw the number 13 as a symbol of death, destruction, and misfortune. Later, Christians associated the number 13 with gatherings of covens who had congress with the devil. 12 persons to a coven and a 13th guest, the devil. Additionally, there are, as we've already mentioned, 13 steps to the gallows and 13 knots in a hangman's noose. Guillotine blades are said to fall 13 inches. The 13th card in most, though not all, tarot decks is the Death card, depicting the, thanatopic figure of death. And supposedly, Lizzie Borden only spoke 13 words at her trial. This Christian symbolism is reflected in early Western references to 13 as an omen of bad fortune, which generally started to appear in the early 18th century, and which warned that 13 people sitting down to a meal together presaged that one of them was going to die in the coming year. Quoting again, I have known and now know persons in genteel life who did and do not sit down to table unmoved with 12 others. Our notion is that one of the 13 so partaking will die ere the expiry of the year, 1823 CE. Another quote, the old story runs that the last individual of the 13 who takes a seat has the greatest chance of being the doomed one, 1839 CE. The superstitions held that the victim would be the first person to rise from the table or the last one to be seated. So this is actually one of the reasons why in some Western cultures, if someone comes to the table, everyone stands up. And if someone leaves the table, everyone stands up. So that way no one is being predicted to die during the year. Where was I? Another quote, Miss Mellon always gave the last corner an equal chance with the rest for life. She used to rise and say, I will not have any friend of mine sit down as the 13th. You must all rise, and we will then sit down again together, 1839 CE. Another quote, everyone knows that to sit down 13 at a table is a most unlucky omen, sure to be followed by the death of one of the party within the year. Some say, however, that the evil will only befall the first who leaves the table, and may be averted if the whole company are careful to rise from the seats at the same moment. That one's from 1883. An even earlier one is from 1823, which has a different solution to this, which involves having the 13th guest with several friends be seated at a different table. So far as this feeling carried that one of the 13th is requested to dine at a side table. So I guess the answer here is if there's 13 guests, banish one to eat with the kids at the kiddie table? Anyway. More generally, groups of 13 people in any context, at a table, in a room, on a ship, were believed to inevitably lead to some kind of horrible tragedy. On a sudden, an old woman unluckily observed there were 13 of us in company. This remark struck a panic terror into several who were present, but a friend of mine, taking notice that one of our female companions was big with child, affirmed there were 14 of us in the room. That quote actually comes from 1711 CE. Notwithstanding opinions in favor of odd numbers, the number 13 is considered as extremely ominous, it being held that when 13 persons meet in a room, one of them will die within the year, 1787 CE. Many will not sail on a vessel when 13 is the number of persons on board, and it is believed that some fatal accident must befall one of them. That quote's from 1808. By the late 19th century, the superstition surrounding 13 had become so general and so common, with people going out of their ways to avoid anything designated by the number 13, that it started affecting the assignment of hotel rooms, desks, cars, and even, whether or not there's a 13th floor in a hotel. "Look at that," said Parnell, pointing to the number on his door. "It was number 13. What a room to give me." This is from 1893 CE. For some time before the late war, I went almost daily to the British Museum reading room. I gave some attention to the desks left to the last corners. There was a very marked preference for any desk other than the one numbered 13. This quote is from 1927. "The mechanic helped me get out of the racing car. 'May as well scratch,' he said. 'He won't be good for anything more this afternoon. It's asking for trouble, having number 13. This quote's from 1930. So if your car was numbered 13, if you were sat at the 13th desk, all of this was considered bad.
Now, there's something that is incredibly illogical about it, but that's okay. Particularly noticeable with the 13th floor thing. Just because you skip it in numbering doesn't mean it's not the 13th one up. It just means you're not calling it that.
Correct. Although
actually there have been some cases where they built a 13th floor and didn't put anything into it.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know that. And I just did a bunch of research onto this.
New York City skyscraper construction is interesting. Someone also pointed out that in a modern tarot deck, the death card is the 13th major arcana, or at least major arcana number 13. The modern tarot deck is not the original tarot deck necessarily.
No,
but
yeah, absolutely.
That is correct.
That is correct. I'm going to rattle off a couple of other little interesting things about 13, and then we'll move on. So industrialist Henry the Ford wouldn't Henry the Ford? You're Henry the Ford. Henry Ford, what the hell, wouldn't do business on Friday the 13th. Multimillionaire Paul Getty once stated, "I wouldn't care to be one of 13 at a table." President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would not dine in a group of 13 people. Many hotel guests refuse to stay in room 13, so rooms are frequently numbered 12, 12A, 12 and a half, or they just skip, and there is no room 13, there's only room 14. Already talked about how many buildings have no floor numbered 13. Some passenger airlines skip 13 when numbering the rows of seating in order to avoid the people refusing to fly in those. Hospitals routinely have no room numbered 13. There is no soundstage numbered 13 at Universal Studios in California. On streets in Florence, Italy, the houses between number 12 and 14 is often labeled 12 and a half. Let's see. So, what does this mean for the average person? Some people actually suffer from a phobia for Friday the 13th, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, and once again, I'm sorry, I didn't actually, let's see, parascavadecatriophobia.
Yeah, I'm not going to do any better with that.
That's my attempt. Some people won't even leave their beds or houses on this date, as we've already mentioned. Symptoms range in both kind and severity, from a feeling of pervasive doom to full-blown panic attacks. Like, they can't leave their house, they can't leave their bed, they can't function on this date. The Stress Management Center and Phobia Institute in North Carolina estimates that paraskevedecatriophobia, something like that, affects between 17 and 21 million Americans. That is not a small number of people who are afraid of this particular date. The fear of Friday the 13th is so pervasive in American culture that Donald Dosey, the founder of the Stress Management Center that we just quoted, estimated that between $800 and $900 million are lost in business every Friday the 13th because people won't do anything on that date. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about the rate of accidents, because I said that I would get back to it. A study in the British Medical Journal, which was published in 1993, attracted some interest because they claimed that transport accidents were increased by 52% on the 13th. However, they also said that the number of admissions from accidents was too small to allow for any kind of meaningful analysis. Subsequent studies have disproved any correlation between Friday the 13th and the rate of car accidents. There isn't one. But that one study gets brought up over and over and over again as proof that there is one. On the contrary, the Dutch Center for Insurance Statistics published something on the 12th of June 2008 which said that fewer accidents and reports of fire and theft occur on the 13th of the month because people are, like the 13th of the month that falls on a Friday, because people are too scared to go out, so they stay home. So rather than there being more accidents, there may actually be less accidents because people don't want to go. However, overall, the number isn't a huge drop. So Dutch insurers received reports of the average of car accidents on certain dates, and they said that there were 7,800 traffic incidents each Friday, but the average figure for when the Friday fell on a 13th was 7,500 accidents.
Right, which theoretically could be significant, but in practice is not verifiably relevant.
Still, interesting that it's actually the opposite. There were fewer car accidents rather than more accidents. So is the number 13, or is Friday the 13th always bad? Is it always considered ill luck? No, not at all. And in fact, in a lot of cultures, it's a different number. It's a bad luck number.
There's
a
a conversation happening in chat about how in both Chinese and Japanese, the number 4 is a homophone with the word for death, and so is considered unlucky.
Yes. It was actually one of the most revered numbers in several ancient tribal and indigenous culture, as it is the number of the months in the lunar cycle of the year. So that is just 13 is very commonly a significant number, not an ill-omened number. In fact, both Muslim and Jewish calendars still operate on the 13-moon calendar for all of their religious holidays. So again, it's significant, not ill-omened. According to Pythagoras, the science of numbers was the basis for all things, and 13 was the most
enigmatic of the numbers.
Why is that word so hard to say?
And emblematic of transformation.
Well done. Yes.
I studied Pythagorean numerology.
I did know that. You didn't even have to look at my notes. You just quoted it. I am impressed, not surprised. To the Maya and Mexica, the number 13 is associated with positive things, including ancestral connections and wisdom. Both the Aztec and Mayan calendars honored the cycles by the occurrence of a cycle through 1 through 13 moons. That was a tortured sentence. I hope you still understood me. In some Mesoamerican traditions, there are 13 heavens. Hopi sun priests make use of 13 points on the horizon for the determination of ceremonial dates. And there's actually a lot of significance around the fact that turtles have 13 segments of their shells in several indigenous First Nations cultures. I'm not going to get into all of that because it's not my tradition. But it's beautiful and it's fascinating, and there's a link I'd be happy to share with anyone who wants to read more of it from a not mine perspective, since I don't have the right to teach on that. In Scottish Gaelic culture, in the Hebrides,
Yes.
oh good, Fridays were considered a very lucky day for sowing seeds. Good Friday in particular was considered an auspicious day for potato planting, and even strict Roman Catholics make a point of planting a bucketful on that day. In other countries, Friday the 13th isn't unlucky. For instance, in Spain and Greece, Tuesday the 13th is considered the day to dread. And in Italy, people fear the 17th day of any month because the Roman numeral for 17 can be arranged to spell VIXI.
Yeah.
Yep. Which means my life is over in Latin. In fact, when movies contain a Friday the 13th plot point are released in Italy, they change everything about the movie. They change the title, they change any date references in order to make it make sense to people in Italy. Prior to the First World War, the number 13 was considered to be a lucky number in France, even being featured on postcards and charms. So you could get charms that said 13 as a good luck thing.
Right, lucky number 13.
Lucky number 13, exactly.
As opposed to lucky number 7, which is what it is now.
In more modern times, 13 is lucky in Italy except in certain contexts, such as we talked about sitting at a dinner table. In Cantonese-speaking areas, including Hong Kong and Macau, the number 13 is considered lucky because it sounds similar to the Cantonese words meaning sure to live, as opposed to the unlucky number 14, which in Cantonese sounds like the words meaning sure to die. So you don't want 14, you do want 13. So it's really just, it's not everywhere. And I keep seeing things that say like, oh, Friday the 13th is this super ancient, super well-known, universal negative thing.
It's definitely not universal. It's not all that ancient. And
it's not due to an ancient witch cult of Freya worshipping sex priestesses targeted by the patriarchy. That didn't happen. I'm sorry, it didn't. That's not true.
Right. So, honestly, what the thing with Friday the 13th reminds me of more than anything else is the Discordian rule of fives. And what I'll go ahead and just give out the secret now. The point of the rule of fives is that you can construct a universal law where everything can be related to this number or a different number, and people will find ways to fill it. You could create the rule of sevens, or the rule of sixes, or in this case, the rule of 13s. And if someone believes that it is so, they will find ways to connect everything together to make it so. Not necessarily because it has any extrinsic validity, but because they've decided that it's true. And if you go looking for everything bad that could have happened on a Friday the 13th, you'll find some stuff. But I bet if I went looking for everything bad that happened on Friday the 22nd, I'd find some stuff too.
There's only so many days, and there's been a lot of negative human history. A lot of positive too. I don't want to leave that on a really dour note. But if you were to look at auspicious events through human history, you're going to find a smattering on any particular day. And this is one of the ways that, assuming certain things based on certain dates is done.
Yeah.
Using very carefully vague statements. But that's a class for another day. Anyway, we're almost at our hour. I hope I didn't bore all of you. I find history fascinating, but I'm aware that it's my passion, it's not everybody's. But if you did like the class, please remember to like either on Facebook Live, where we're actually putting this out right now,
live, or on
YouTube
when we post it later.
And subscribe on YouTube. And, you know, please feel free to comment on the video and to request other topics for us to cover in the future. If you do want our sources for this document, they are absolutely available upon request, including several online articles, including the one that I'm quoting on the stuff regarding the Mesoamerican traditions and the Hopi traditions. I'm happy to send that out to people. And I really appreciate all you people who actually attended live. I'm thrilled. We had a really good live audience today. And I think that's everything. Be safe out there, everyone. Happy Friday the 13th.